The rain fell in torrents, each drop a cold reminder of Elena's situation as she stood alone on the sidewalk outside the upscale restaurant. Her emerald dress, once elegant and carefully chosen for their anniversary dinner, now clung to her shivering frame like a second skin. The mascara she'd applied with such hope earlier that evening traced dark rivers down her cheeks. "Get out," Marcus had said, his voice as cold as the autumn storm. "Find your own way home." The words still echoed in her mind as she watched the taillights of their BMW disappear into the night. 7 years of marriage, reduced to this moment of abandonment. The argument had started over something so trivial, a comment about his mother's passive-aggressive remarks during dinner, but it had escalated with the fury of years of accumulated resentment. Elena pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, her designer heels clicking against the wet pavement as she sought shelter under the restaurant's awning. The valet, a young man with kind eyes, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, do you need us to call you a taxi?" She wanted to say yes, to swallow her pride and retreat to the safety of their pristine suburban home. But something deeper held her back. The humiliation of the evening mixed with a growing realization that had been building for months. She had become a shadow of herself, tiptoeing around Marcus's moods, shrinking to fit his expectations. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely audible above the rain. Elena thought about the woman she used to be before Marcus, before she'd given up her promising career in art restoration to support his ambitions, before she'd learned to silence her opinions to avoid his cutting remarks, before she'd convinced herself that his controlling behavior was just his way of caring. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Maybe Marcus had realized his mistake. Maybe he was coming back. Instead, the message was from her sister Sarah, 3 time zones away. "How's the anniversary dinner going? Hope you're having a wonderful night." Elena stared at the screen, the irony burning as fiercely as the tears she refused to shed. How could she explain that her wonderful night had devolved into standing alone in a storm, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love and protect her? The restaurant's warm lights spilled onto the street, and through the rain-streaked windows, she could see other couples sharing intimate conversations, their faces glowing with affection. Once, she and Marcus had looked like that. Once, she had believed their love could weather any storm. But as she stood there, drenched and alone, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a strange sense of clarity. The rain wasn't just washing away her makeup, it was washing away her illusions. For the first time in a long time, she could see her situation with brutal honesty. She was 32 years old, intelligent, talented, and trapped in a marriage that had slowly eroded her sense of self. Tonight's abandonment wasn't an aberration. It was the culmination of years of emotional neglect and manipulation. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Elena looked up at the stormy sky. She had a choice to make, and she could feel it approaching like the next lightning strike. 20 minutes had passed since Marcus drove away, and Elena's shivering had intensified. The restaurant staff glanced at her with growing concern, and she knew she couldn't stand there much longer without becoming a spectacle. She reached for her phone to call a ride service when the sound of an approaching engine made her look up. A sleek black Tesla pulled up to the curb, its silent arrival almost ethereal in the storm. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face that made Elena's heart skip a beat. "Elena." Dr. James Chin's voice carried the same gentle warmth she remembered from their brief encounters at the art museum's charity events. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" James was the museum's head conservator, a position she'd once dreamed of holding herself. They'd met several times over the past year when Marcus reluctantly accompanied her to cultural events, though Marcus had always been dismissive of her interest in returning to her career. Elena struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal the full extent of her humiliation. "My ride fell through." Without hesitation, James stepped out of the car, pulling off his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. The simple gesture of kindness nearly broke her composure entirely. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm," he said, opening the passenger door. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Elena found herself studying James's profile in the dashboard light. She'd always noticed his intelligence and passion when he spoke about art restoration, but tonight she saw something else, a fundamental kindness that felt foreign after years of Marcus's criticism. I heard through the grapevine that you used to work in restoration, James said, breaking the comfortable silence. Renaissance pieces, wasn't it? Elena nodded, surprised he'd remembered. It feels like a lifetime ago. The Whitmore Foundation has been looking for someone with your expertise. We're about to begin restoration on a collection of 15th century manuscripts that were damaged in a flood. It's a challenging project, but incredibly rewarding. Something stirred in Elena's chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten. Excitement. Purpose. I haven't worked in the field in years, she said quietly. I'm probably not qualified anymore. Talent doesn't disappear, James replied. It just needs the right opportunity to resurface. They pulled up to an all-night diner, its neon sign casting pink and blue reflections on the wet asphalt. Inside, the warmth enveloped them like an embrace, and Elena realized how cold she'd become, both physically and emotionally. Over cups of strong coffee, James spoke passionately about the restoration project, his eyes lighting up as he described the delicate process of bringing damaged art back to life. Elena found herself leaning forward, asking technical questions she hadn't thought about in years, feeling neurons firing that had been dormant for too long. You know, James said, stirring sugar into his coffee. There's something poetic about restoration work. Taking something that's been damaged, sometimes badly, and finding a way to honor both its original beauty and the story of its survival. Elena's breath caught. She wasn't sure if he was still talking about manuscripts. Her phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. Are you coming home or not? I'm not waiting up. The casual cruelty of it struck her like a physical blow. Here was James, treating her with respect and intellectual curiosity, while her husband couldn't even muster concern for her well-being after abandoning her in a storm. I should probably go, she said, though every fiber of her being wanted to stay in this warm sanctuary of possibility. Elena, James said softly, his hand briefly covering hers on the table. Whatever's happening in your life right now, remember that you have value beyond what anyone else tells you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As he drove her home, Elena stared out at the rain and made a decision that would change everything. Elena's hands trembled as she inserted the key into her front door, but it wasn't from the cold anymore. The house stood silent and dark. Marcus had gone to bed without waiting, just as his text had promised. In the darkness, she could see their life together with new clarity. The expensive furniture chosen to impress others, the family photos that looked perfect but felt hollow, the subtle ways Marcus had isolated her from friends and dreams. She climbed the stairs quietly, her wet dress leaving a trail on the hardwood floors she'd once taken such pride in maintaining. In the guest room, the one Marcus claimed she snored too loudly to share their bed when he was stressed, Elena sat at her old desk, the one piece of furniture from her previous life he'd allowed her to keep. In the bottom drawer, beneath years of accumulated household papers, she found it, her portfolio from before Marcus. Her fingers traced the photographs of her restoration work, each image a testament to skills she'd convinced herself were worthless. A 16th century altarpiece she'd spent months carefully cleaning. A damaged Caravaggio sketch she'd helped stabilize. Her master's thesis on innovative techniques for preserving water-damaged manuscripts. Elena opened her laptop and began typing an email to James, her heart racing with each word. Dear Dr. Chun, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the manuscript restoration project. If the position is still available, I would be very interested in discussing it further. I realize my skills may be rusty, but I'm willing to work hard to prove myself. Thank you for reminding me tonight that I am more than I'd allowed myself to become. She hit send before she could change her mind. The next morning, Marcus found her in the kitchen, dressed in her old professional attire instead of the housewife uniforms he'd grown accustomed to seeing. What's this about? He asked, his tone already irritated. And why didn't you sleep in our room last night? I have a job interview, Elena said simply, pouring herself coffee with steady hands. Hey, what? Marcus's face darkened. We agreed you didn't need to work. Your job is taking care of this house, taking care of me. No, Elena said, the word feeling foreign but powerful on her tongue. You decided that. I never agreed. For the first time in years, she met his gaze directly. I'm going back to work, Marcus. I'm going back to being myself. The argument that followed was explosive, filled with accusations and ultimatums. Marcus revealed the depth of his need to control her, his fear that her independence would diminish his importance. But Elena had found her voice again, and with each cruel word he spoke, her resolve only strengthened. 3 months later, Elena stood in the museum's conservation lab, her skilled hands working to separate centuries-old vellum pages that had been fused together by water damage. The work was meticulous, requiring infinite patience and unwavering focus, qualities she'd forgotten she possessed. "Remarkable," James said, observing her progress. "You've managed to preserve text that we thought was lost forever." Elena smiled, her face illuminated by the specialized lighting. Around her, other conservators worked quietly on their own projects, and she felt a profound sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. Her phone sat silently on the workbench. Marcus's calls had stopped coming weeks ago, after she'd filed for divorce. The house was up for sale, and she'd moved into a small apartment near the museum, a space that was truly hers for the first time since college. "You know," Elena said to James as they worked side by side, "there's something you said that first night that I keep thinking about honoring both the original beauty and the story of survival." James looked up from his microscope, understanding flickering in his eyes. "I used to think my marriage was worth preserving at any cost," Elena continued, her voice steady. "But some damage can't be repaired, and shouldn't be. Sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is start over." Outside, it began to rain again, but this time Elena smiled at the sound. She had learned that storms, like everything else in life, eventually pass. And sometimes, what emerges afterward is stronger and more beautiful than what came before. As she returned to her work, carefully breathing life back into something that had been written off as lost, Elena realized she had become her own greatest restoration project. And this time, the work would be on her own terms. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel and enjoy these other amazing stories.